Well, hey folks, welcome to True Crime Tuesday, a brand new series here at Profiling Evil. We've got 4 big stories this week. Each one turns on decisions that offenders made. A missing child case out of California, complete with disguises, interstate travel, and an uncooperative mother. And then we're going to go look at the brutal assault and ring robbery in Seattle, Washington that left an elderly victim fighting to recover. The suspect in this case actually bit off her entire finger so that he could steal her ring. Then, a 13-year-old girl who was rescued from a Pittsburgh basement after online grooming and assault. Finally, we're going to look at a fugitive who tried to beat the system by staging his own death. It worked for a dozen years. Now let's dig in and see what we can walk away with as we try to understand more about criminal behavior. Well, hey everybody, welcome to our brand new series, True Crime Tuesdays. Because evil doesn't take the weekends off, and neither do we. Now, each week we're going to break down some of the most compelling and high-impact criminal cases that are making headlines. We're not just going to talk about what happened. We're going to dig deeper into the why behind what happened. So if you haven't already, take a moment and hit that like and subscribe button. And turn your notifications on so that you never miss an episode of Profiling Evil. And please share us with your friends. It really does help us get the word out. Now here's something new. I'm excited about this because with True Crime Tuesdays, I'm going to follow up with Feedback Fridays. I'm going to release a follow-up episode that answers your questions from the week. And you can send your questions by email to profilingevil@gmail.com. or upload a short video from your phone using the link that I put down in the description area. By sending your question in, you're giving me permission to include it right here in the podcast. Now, let's dive into this week's story, starting with the missing case of 9-year-old Melody Buzzard. And I want to start with what's confirmed and why it matters. Santa Barbara County deputies arrested Ashley Buzzard, 40-year-old mother of this child, on a felony false imprisonment warrant, not tied to her daughter's disappearance. Now, investigators previously released October 7th surveillance imagery that shows, or appears to show, Ashley and Melody in wigs at a rental counter at a car rental place. Additional video placed them near the Utah-Colorado border 2 days later, October 9th. But when Ashley returned the rental car to Lompoc, Melody wasn't with her. This case is filled with all kinds of counter surveillance. And I think that's what got people talking about this case, because Ashley Buzzard isn't cooperating with police and she's not telling them where 9-year-old Melody is. And that is the big concern. Now, from a behavioral standpoint, a few things jumped out to me right away. Number one, this idea of using wigs and messing with license plates. Those aren't impulse decisions. Those are classic tactics to avoid being recognized casually. And when successful, it can allow someone to slip past automated license plate readers out on the highways. Now, people who expect law enforcement pressure will often choose routes with fewer cameras. They'll travel when traffic and eyes are limited, and they'll use methods that leave no digital footprints. They employ tactics like using cash or prepaid phones, public Wi-Fi. But all of this tells us something really critical in this case, that this wasn't panic, it was planning. And when cases like this involve a custodial figure and a missing child, that planning becomes a roadmap for uncovering clues and evidence. You see, every gas station, motel check-in, fast food stop, restroom breaks, all create a timestamp and potential eyewitnesses. That's why geography and the behavior in this case go hand in hand. And that's exactly why I always dig into a map as part of my investigations, because human movement and the locations that are involved in these cases matter almost as much as the motive behind them. So let's start by anchoring this in geography. That landmark point of origin gives us a base to extend a likely route toward the desert corridors, feeding along I-70 and I-15 and into stretches unknown, but they are known for sparse camera coverage and minimal digital surveillance. That path that she took pushes through the Utah-Colorado line, and that's where the trail starts to thin out. Now from there, movement patterns suggest possible eastern progression toward Nebraska and Kansas, although those legs haven't been officially itemized. And then on the return leg, the pattern starts to get even more complicated. And frankly, that's where things really get interesting, because instead of the direct retrace that we might expect, we begin to see lateral shifts along this travel corridor. Brief diversions perhaps into secondary highways, then back on the main interstates. It's the kind of movement that suggests that somebody is balancing two kinds of priorities. One, staying mobile, but number two, hoping to remain unseen. Now there are stops at low service exits, the kind where gas pumps might still take cash and the security cameras are more for show than for coverage. But these kinds of exits often sit just outside of cell data saturation zones, which means that there are fewer automated pings, weaker Wi-Fi signals, and smaller chances of being digitally marked. Then there are the motels, the ones with the flickering neon sign and the handwritten ledgers where somebody might check in without leaving much of a paper trail. To most of us, these look like the forgotten relics of old highways across America, but to investigators, they're pressure points. They're important. They're places that are isolated but predictable, and they are rich with potential witnesses. Think of truck stop clusters because they kind of fit in this same profile. They serve as temporary havens for crime, crowded enough to blend in, yet transient enough that a suspect can disappear before anybody connects the dots. Still, each of these stops carries risk. A curious attendant might remember a child who seemed nervous. A diner's waitress could recall a woman in a wig ordering late night coffee. Or maybe a truck driver notices that car that's lingering near the back lot with plates getting swapped out between the fuel islands under bad lighting. These fragments become evidence in cases like this. The clerk's recollection, the half-seen license plates, the subtle changes in travel rhythm all become breadcrumbs that investigators strive to find. Because even in the emptiest stretches of the desert, movement leaves a trail, and everything is a point on the map. The challenge is reading it before it's covered by time and distance, before the evidence is destroyed by the elements. Now that's why law enforcement isn't just asking for camera pulls at front counters. They're focusing on the ingress and egress, those side lots, alleys, the fuel lanes where plate swaps or disguises can happen. Geography always tells a story, but the behavior gives the story meaning. You see, law enforcement is examining all of this because you just can't hide from digital breadcrumbs. Even those who are carefully planning a crime will likely leave a trail from things like credit card or debit card taps at fuel or fast food stops, Wi-Fi logs at motels, license plate recognition software picking up a plate here and there. The natural handoff occurs between cell sites in all of our country. So if mobile devices are powered on, it's going to provide a footprint, and the footprint is science. Even the telematics off of newer vehicles, including rental cars, can provide insight, and all of these layers, when fused together, can offer a geographic and temporal mosaic that narrows the search grid. Now, I want to play a short news clip on this case, but first, I want to acknowledge one of my favorite resources called newspapers.com, because when I'm searching stories like this, I rely on local journalists who were there when it happened, not the post-event AI summaries out there. So check out newspapers.com if you want the source on information, and I've put a link in the description down below for a discount. Now let's watch the news clip.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Beth Farnsworth.
And I'm CJ Ward. We begin at 6 with Santa Barbara County Sheriff's deputies arresting Ashley Buzzard. She's the mother of missing 9-year-old Melody Buzzard, and we're told the charges are unrelated to the search for Melody.
And News Channel reporter Jared Zinn joins us live from Vandenberg Village. Jared, you have new information about those charges.
Good evening, Beth and CJ. Yes, the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office says detectives learned that 40-year-old Ashley had prevented a person from leaving a location against their will, which qualifies as false imprisonment. Detectives arrested Ashley this morning on a felony charge of false imprisonment, and she will be booked on that charge in the Northern Branch Jail with bail set at $100,000. On October 14th, a school administrator reported that Melody Buzzard had been missing from school for some time. And when deputies arrived at Melody's mother's home in the 500 block of Mars Avenue in Vandenberg Village, the 9-year-old was not there. No clear explanation was provided for her whereabouts, and her mother Ashley has been uncooperative with law enforcement since the initial report was made. Investigators determined Ashley rented a white Chevy Malibu on October 7th from the Lompoc Valley, and surveillance images show both her and Melody in wigs. Deputies say Ashley drove Melody on a 3-day road trip in the rental car as far as Nebraska, making stops in Kansas, Utah, and Nevada. At some point, officials tell us Ashley switched license plates on the rental car and also changed wigs during the road trip, presumably to avoid detection. Ashley returned to the Lompoc Valley without Melody, and investigators are focusing on plausible sightings of Ashley in Green River and Junction, Utah. Deputies emphasize that the search for Melody remains a missing person investigation.
What we want to make very clear is that this arrest does not signal an end to the search for Melody. And so we need people to continue to send in information. If they see Melody or if they know where Melody is, we want to continue to encourage people to share the story from that aspect. We need to find where Melody is, and we need to ensure her safety. And there was this arrest that is not related to the missing person search. And so we need to, we don't want the public to become derailed by that and lose sight of the fact that we still do have a missing 9-year-old.
The FBI, Santa Barbara DA, and sheriff offices continue to ask for the public's help in finding Melody. If anyone has seen Melody or if you have any information, you are encouraged to call the Sheriff's Department's Criminal Investigations Division. Live in Vandenberg Village, I'm News Channel reporter Jared Zinn.
So that's our first case, Ashley Buzzard. And for those of you who are wondering what you can do to help this little girl get back safely, think about whether you have any dash cam footage if you happen to have driven along the same route that they've traveled. And folks, if you see anything that seems credible, give it to law enforcement immediately. You know, the plea for information goes to motel workers, the long-haul truckers, everybody out there. If anyone has noticed this child, or if any person appears to be under coercive control of another person, I really think you should contact law enforcement and let them check it out. Now, don't get personally involved in these kinds of cases. Gather information from a safe distance and report it to the people that have the authority to do something about it. And if you're listening to this podcast while you're out driving, just kind of put this in the back of your mind as you go along. If you see something suspicious, you know the tagline, report it. Now, the bottom line in this case suggests that there were tactics employed to avoid detection. So our hope has to remain that Melody is recovered safely soon and this mystery gets solved. Now, if you're interested in this case, you can watch my longer video on some of the reasons that I think Ashley Buzzard might not be talking to law enforcement. Just visit my playlist, and please Share your thoughts on this case and send me any questions that you might have for Feedback Fridays. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to give you a chance to be highlighted on the program. Well, our second case today is out of Seattle, Washington, where a brutal attack occurred against an 88-year-old woman. It happened on October 13th of 2025 when Emma Cotton was attacked outside of her Seattle home. After this blitz-style attack, she was dragged into her garage where she was brutally assaulted. The suspect tried to rob her of her jewelry, and when he couldn't remove her diamond ring, he bit off her finger, and then he fled with both the finger and the ring. Now, from a behavioral perspective, the location itself is a rich piece of evidence. Not just the crime scene, but the surrounding geography as well, because it shapes the offender's choices. Most offenders are going to operate inside of a comfort radius. They're going to favor familiar footpaths, back roads, routes that they've used before. That familiarity shows up in predictable ways, and when predators avoid obvious camera corridors, or they pick streets with limited lighting, or maybe use blind corners or vacant lots for short-term concealment, it suggests familiarity with the area, and frankly, it might also suggest significant pre-planning and forethought, even if they weren't from the area. So when I map out defined radiuses around where an incident occurs, I'm not just drawing lines on a map. I'm looking for the plumbing of movement, the egress and access points, sight lines where street lights drop off, the proximity of neighbors' houses, bus stops, taxi stands. I'm looking for things like alleyways or those small uncared for parcels of property that become dead space, because each of these elements bends the decision-making of somebody who's on the move. A well-lit sidewalk with frequent foot traffic is going to be a whole lot different than a stretch of highway where there's only one dim convenience store and a single motel at the exit ramp. So in cases like this is where CCTV, both residential and commercial, becomes invaluable. Investigators will try to stitch together a camera-to-camera chain across the area, creating a temporal corridor, so to speak, that follows the person from one frame to the next. Think of 24 Hours, the series. Now, the usual approach is to segment time, an hour before the incident, an hour after, and all this narrows windows as we develop the case. Now that lets detectives build timelines and test their hypotheses. Things like, did the person arrive by vehicle or on foot? Was there a drop-off point and a recovery spot nearby? Did somebody loiter near a bus stop minutes before the crime occurred? And cameras can show this kind of small, telling movement of a suspect. It can also show things like somebody running from the crime scene or quickly jumping into an awaiting car. These images don't just record action, they put behavior into context. So think out loud for just a moment. What behavior could you assume from somebody who's running away from a scene, a crime scene? Why did they turn where they turned? Because actions can show disorganization, or it might show a level of premeditation and local knowledge. When we layer forensic evidence against witness statements, license plate checks, cell tower information, you get a multi-source timeline that is so much stronger than any single observation. Go back to our discussions on the forms of evidence. Geography and mapping provide the muscle and the motion. When they're read together, they tell a far more comprehensive story about who the offender might be and how familiar this predator is with the area. It might also explain why they exploited this particular victim in this particular case. These are the pieces of intelligence that turn a scatter of observations into focused investigative leads. Now, Emma spent days in the ICU and she's now in rehab. Police have released these surveillance images of the suspect, who's still at large, and her family is pleading for tips. And I want to catch a news report where we hear from Emma's sons.
Can you imagine, 88 years old? I know she's having nightmares.
Together, a family faces a devastating act of violence.
She's got a fracture over her eye, fractured cheekbone, fractured ribs.
3 brothers struggle to process what happened to their mother, Emma Cotton.
She's a fighter.
Marvin and Ricky live in Seattle. Wes lives out of state.
We hope to have this person off the street so this doesn't happen to someone else's relative.
Distance separates them, but a single mission unites them. Justice.
Justice to me is just her coming home.
October 13th in the Rainier Beach neighborhood in broad daylight, Emma stepped onto her back porch to do chores. A routine moment quickly turned violent.
She felt somebody breathing behind her, and she said as soon as she turned around, he just started punching her, assaulting her.
The attacker demanded her jewelry.
She said, listen, if you wanted that, I'd take it off and give it to you, but he probably wasn't in his right mind.
He dragged her into a garage, then bit her finger off before fleeing. Surveillance cameras captured these images of the suspect. Paramedics rushed Emma to the hospital.
To see my mom's finger bitten off and her still being calm, but like I say, it almost made me faint to look at it.
Their mother leads Mount Zion Baptist Church's senior ministry. She's poured decades into serving her community. Now her focus shifts to healing after fighting for her life.
She fought, she scratched, she kicked, she did everything.
It definitely was something spiritual that happened while she's still here, how she fought this guy off, and we just want him caught.
Now, police data for the South Precinct shows more than 300 robberies occurring annually. So far this year, there have been more than 200 in the South Precinct. But the victim's sons say her neighborhood is usually quiet, which makes this attack even more concerning for them. Joyce?
And how is she doing after all of this?
She is still recovering at a facility. Her sons say she has a fighting spirit and is showing remarkable grace, telling them that she already forgives the person who did this to her. Joyce?
Now, stepping back a little bit, I find it really interesting that the predator moved Emma from the backyard and into her garage. This makes some sense given the interior of the garage would give the criminal more isolation from any kind of an external threat. But it also provides some additional situational control, perhaps even dampening the sounds of the assault. But the question I can't quite understand is, why does he bite off the victim's ring finger? This isn't just an example of brutality and depraved thinking. It is frustration-driven escalation. I mean, why didn't he just find some lubricant in the garage to slip the ring off of her finger? Or if he's going to get really violent, just use clippers to cut the ring off of the finger. But instead, he bites the entire finger off above the ring. Now, offenders in these high-pressure crimes often will cascade from their goal-focused reactions to a rage-reactive response when things don't work out the way they'd like them to. So if the predator in this case is operating under the influence of hallucinogenics or has a drug abuse history, their physiological demands might be pushing them to act uncharacteristically or provide this unpredictable violence that we're seeing in this thing. Now, there's one positive that comes out of this disorganization and this horrific act, though, and that is that law enforcement should be able to recover some valuable evidence. They should be able to recover the suspect's DNA at the bite site, possibly even offender blood or saliva if they cut themselves. Post-crime, it's possible that the offender might try to pawn the ring or use social media to sell it, and it would become discoverable and traceable, and then tracked back to the predator. Now again, this predator is remaining at large right now, but I think law enforcement is closing in. But for each of us, this case is a perfect reminder that we need to be vigilant in our activities each and every day. Now, Emma, she was in her backyard. Stopping an assault like this would have been really difficult, but it does make me think about other ways in which we can minimize our risk of victimization around our homes. We should be considering things like reinforcing our doors and windows, making sure that deadbolts are used, and that we should Consider security cameras and systems that are out there to make our lives safer. And if somebody comes to your door, don't open the door to strangers, and keep your mobile phone with you. I would also suggest that you maintain a kind of a circle of safety through neighborhood watch or just good neighbors that you can rely on, and your family influences, of course. And most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels off, you know, that new helpful neighbor or the service worker who's acting odd, take note and report your concerns. And don't use their phone number, look up the official phone number. And when you're out and about in places like shopping malls, park near entrances and well-lit areas. Keep your keys ready and scan your surroundings before getting into or out of the car. And even if you're physically limited, don't be afraid to be defensive. Yell, use a loud voice, whistle, ask for help if you're feeling threatened in any way. This case in Seattle wasn't just a theft. It was a violent crime, escalated by a disorganized and brutal criminal who's willing to harm somebody else. So if you know anything about this crime, or if the suspect's image or clothing is ringing a bell, call the Seattle Police Department immediately. Now, the next case I want to talk about is the rescue of a 13-year-old girl from Louisiana who was found alive in a sheet-covered box in a Pittsburgh basement. Now, police have arrested a 26-year-old man named Keyshawn Crumity and charged him with things like human trafficking, sexual assault, and other related charges. It appears that this whole thing started with online grooming on a social media platform. Eventually, the teenager was convinced to get on a bus and travel across multiple states, where she was met by an accomplice of Crumity, who then accompanied her to Pittsburgh, where he assaulted her for several days. Now, the grooming of this child followed a predictable and sad path. The love bombing, the accelerated intimacy, the secrecy pacts, the fantasy narrative that was pitched, like, I'll adopt you or you'll be safe with us, filling one of those basic needs that we've talked about. Now, the offender gradually displaced this 13-year-old's guardian as her primary voice of influence, and then he convinced her to leave her home and travel to meet him. Now, U.S. Marshals say that this was a week-long hunt that began in Louisiana. And along the way, it included the arrest of another person, a 62-year-old guy named Ronald Smith in Columbus, Georgia. Now, once this child was in protective custody, she was now in the hospital being examined. She made a comment that I just can't forget. She said being in the hospital and being examined felt like the safest place that she'd ever been. Holy cow. Let's catch this local media news clip.
Investigators say 26-year-old Keyshawn Crumity kept the girl hidden for days inside his Brighton Heights home.
An amount of policemen, SWAT, FBI, U.S. Marshals, up and down the road. And then I saw a girl, which looked like a girl, very small, being pulled out and taken to the right, which was where the ambulance was.
According to police, Crumity met the teen on Snapchat, luring her from Baker to Pennsylvania with promises of safety and adoption. Instead, investigators say he gave her alcohol and edibles, then sexually assaulted her multiple times before police arrived.
You would never think of any so atrocious like that. It's just horrible.
Detectives say Crumity wasn't alone. A woman from Washington, D.C. allegedly traveled with the teen to Pittsburgh, and the three slept in the same basement bed. The U.S. Marshals tracked the girl's path and then tipped off Pittsburgh police Thursday evening.
It makes me happy that they were making that the arrest, between everybody for that. It's scary, though. Just crazy.
Unnerving.
Unnerving, yeah. Yeah. I'm glad they they got the guy.
That investigation also led to the arrest of 62-year-old Ronald Smith in Columbus, Georgia. Police say he and another man drove the girl from Louisiana to Georgia and then put her on a bus bound for Pittsburgh. Crumedy is now in jail, charged with child trafficking, multiple counts of sexual assault, and corruption of a minor. The girl is receiving medical care and support as investigators pursue additional arrests.
If you're like me, folks, you're probably thinking about situations that have happened over your life. Things and times when you've seen somebody in a situation that kind of twisted your stomach, that left you wondering if something illegal was going on, but you didn't do anything. It might be that it's a young person you see who's traveling alone, or that person is being controlled by someone in a situation that doesn't seem like a protective parent or guardian. Now, if you're like me, you're probably too uncomfortable to approach the child and ask if they're all right. Might even be offensive to the child. But if something's really bugging you and you don't know what to do, my advice is simple. Keep your distance. Don't get intimately involved, but snap a photo or two. Get the license plate number off of the vehicle and write down the description of the vehicle, including any dents or chips. Write a description of both the victim or potential victim and the suspect. You know, a patrol officer can assess the situation quickly, so call police. And you know what? I don't think a caring parent would be offended if law enforcement checked on them. Now, in this investigation, law enforcement relied upon digital forensics, on mobile app logs, on cell phone data, all including IP addresses and Wi-Fi to bring this child home. There undoubtedly were financial crumbs as well, because they traveled her across the country. Things like prepaid cards or bus tickets. You know, as parents and guardians, we should be really looking at things like our children's direct messages. We should be checking their mobile devices. We should know who they know and communicate and question any age mismatched kinds of relationships. Digital breadcrumbs and human vigilance are what rescued this child. It might be uncomfortable to demand access to your child's mobile device, but it could actually save their life. Don't be afraid to parent. Well, after vanishing for more than a decade, Anthony Lennon, a convicted sex offender who was once listed among Oklahoma's 10 most wanted, has finally been located. Now, authorities say that he faked his own death back in 2012, staging a bloody scene outside of the Super 8 motel where he was working in Moore, Oklahoma. He used his own blood to make it look like he'd been abducted, and then he disappeared completely. Well, it was an elaborate deception, and while the world moved on, law enforcement didn't. They remained focused, and they continued to try to track this guy down. And here's the kicker. After 12 years on the run, they caught him on Halloween night. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. The guy who faked his death in a pool of blood ended up getting unmasked on one of the nights of the year built around disguises. I mean, you almost have to admire the irony of it all. It's a guy who spent a decade pretending to be a ghost, and he ended up picking the wrong holiday to come back to life. Now, Lennon's criminal history dates back to 2008, though, when he was convicted of aggravated child pornography. He received a 20-year, get this, suspended sentence. Now, only a few years later, investigators reportedly found chat logs, a desktop computer, and hundreds of discs that contained horrific images of children and infants being sexually assaulted. Although he was arrested again in 2011, he was released on bond. Are you getting this? And the moment of freedom that gave him also gave him the chance and the motive to orchestrate his own disappearance. And when officers arrived to serve a warrant in 2012, they discovered the blood outside the hotel, but no Lennon, later determining that he actually staged the scene so that he could escape prosecution. And for 13 years, this guy lived under the alias of Justin Phillips, even enrolling at SUNY Canton and blending into the community. How many victims must he have? A joint investigation between Oklahoma and New York law enforcement ultimately uncovered his true identity. And they did that through fingerprint analysis and a whole bunch of other things. Now, they're executing search warrants on his New York residence and electronic devices so that they can determine if he's committed additional crimes while he's on the run. And I'd love you to weigh in here because I can't imagine he doesn't have a batch more. He's currently in custody in New York and he's awaiting extradition to Oklahoma, where the investigators are saying that they're going to finally hold him accountable for the crimes that he committed against children 13 plus years ago. Even when an offender like Lennon tries to scrub every trace of their identity away, the data has a funny way of fighting back. Systems evolve, databases get smarter, and digital ghosts, they tend to leave fingerprints. And over time, those fragments, the DMV records, the traffic stops, the old fingerprint cards, medical registrations, even those stray online orders start to reknit themselves into a trail that doesn't stay cold forever. Cross-matching of stale warrants against modern databases often turns up hits that simply didn't exist a few years ago. That's why those old wanted bulletins still matter, because long-term fugitives don't usually hide in caves. They hide in plain sight. In fact, I talk about it in my book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. Now, they rent apartments, they apply for jobs, they fill out forms like everybody else, and sometimes it's a landlord or an HR clerk or a DMV technician who becomes the unexpected hero by bridging those little gaps and glitches that finally bring a fugitive back into focus. And in Lennon's case, patience, technology, and frankly a dash of luck and timing did what a nationwide manhunt couldn't. 13 years after faking his death, the guy who literally tried to bleed himself off the map was caught on Halloween night. I mean, you can't script it any better. And after years of pretending to be a ghost, Anthony Lennon finally ran into a system that doesn't believe in haunted paperwork. Let's watch this news clip.
Convicted child sex offender has been captured after spending 13 years on the run.
Mr. Lennon maybe thinks he's a smart person, but he's not as smart as he thinks he is.
After a decades-long search, law enforcement tracked and arrested former Moore resident Anthony Lennon Thursday night in Canton, New York.
He was eventually identified through fingerprints while using the alias of Justin Phillips.
Law enforcement says Lennon has been hiding since 2012, where detectives say he faked his own death at a Super 8 motel where he worked. There, officers found puddles of blood.
He went to extremes, and we did determine that the large amount of blood at this staged crime scene actually was his.
Lennon had been sentenced in 2008 to a 20-year suspended sentence for aggravated possession of child pornography. In 2011, a task force discovered he had additional child pornography. He was arrested, bonded out, and then staged an elaborate scene.
And just like that, Mr. Lennon disappeared, and his whereabouts remained unknown until recently. We recently received some new information and developed a possible location for Lennon in upstate New York. I will not be talking about how that information was developed or what that information was, because it could result in additional criminal charges for Mr. Lennon.
According to law enforcement, Lennon was now a student enrolled at a local university in Canton. Court documents say he was pursuing a computer science doctorate at the time he disappeared.
What crimes has he been committing over this past decade? Do you believe that he has hurt further children while evading police?
Once again, a great question. I can tell you that search warrants are being ran in New York on devices and residences, and we'll see what they reveal to see whether or not future crimes have been committed.
Hopefully now we can sentence Mr. Lennon to prison, and he can be there for the rest of his life, because these crimes carry up to life, and there will be no more children harmed by him.
Well, there you go, folks. That's this week's biggest crime cases on True Crime Tuesday. Now, I hope you'll take a moment and weigh in on these cases and put your thoughts down below. And before we wrap, let me remind you that Feedback Friday is your segment. It's a place where you can send me your questions through email at profilingevil@gmail.com Or you can pick up your mobile device and record your question on your phone and upload it using the link that I'm providing down below in the description. Now remember, you're giving me permission to use your name and your question in the Feedback Friday segment by corresponding with me. And make sure you're watching for Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. And if you like your true crime on the go, I hope you'll subscribe to Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. Now please, visit profilingevil.com for more insights and information, and sign up for our digital newsletter, the BOLO. It stands for Be on the Lookout. And the only way you're going to get the BOLO is by signing up at profilingevil.com. And I promise you, folks, I'll never sell your information to anybody. Oh, and hey, while you're at my website, check out my books, including my newest book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. It is a comprehensive guide for true crime enthusiasts, and it hopefully will help you reduce your risk of being victimized. Share it with your family and your loved ones. And don't forget to check out my new podcast, Gardens of Evil, which is coming soon with our new partner, Gamut Podcast Network. The link's down below. Hey, and thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.